Next up, we're going to move east from where we've been this morning and this afternoon. Jeff Larkin is going to tell us some about the microhabitat and landscape influences on occupancy of golden-winged warblers in managed habitats.
Got it. All right, first things first. Yeah, the horse goes. Now we have a party. Thanks. I want to start out by just stating that this symposium has been excellent. It's so cool to see a lot of the parallels between the eastern and western working lands for wildlife, and we should definitely get together a lot more often than we probably do to share our experiences. I want to thank my co-authors, and another great opportunity to be here, or reason for me to be here, is to actually be the headliner for three much more important talks. The talks that follow me are by three of my graduate students that really they're the ones that make all of this work. So excited to open up the show for them and let them show all of the hard work that they've been doing. And then finally, the last big co-author would be the landowners that allow us access to their lands. Hundreds of them for this particular study. So Golden-winged Warbler, it's a neotropical migratory songbird that nests in early successional habitats of eastern deciduous forest, expansive landscapes of eastern deciduous forests. It's a ground nester. It nests in habitat that's quite heterogeneous, right? So shrubs, trees, scattered grass patches, and the like. It's been experiencing a population decline for the last several decades, and it's actually one of those species that's being considered for listing under the Endangered Species Act. It's a species for which a lot of attention has been focused with respect to its breeding habitat characteristics or requirements. A big factor for its decline is breeding habitat loss or degradation, and that comes in two forms. I mentioned that it is a species that requires large, expansive areas of forest. And of course, if you haven't been in the East in some time, you know that a lot of our forests have a lot of challenges from conversion in and of itself. But even where we have landscapes that we have a whole lot of forest across them, those forests actually are being influenced by a change in economic drivers of how forests are managed. And what has ultimately resulted would be that patches of early successional habitats that would result from overstory removals in the past really fall away from our landscapes as an era of high grading on private lands really leads the charge, whereby regenerating forest is not an outcome. And this is just an example of what our eastern deciduous forest looks like in Pennsylvania, but if you look at any state forest resource guidelines, you would see that this is pretty much their trends for our eastern deciduous forest. And if you look at the golden-winged warblers population trend for breeding bird survey over time, it mirrors pretty well. This is no analysis, but it's pretty obvious. So a lot of folks went to work. Well, we should recognize the folks that preceded us, like the John Compers and the Frank Gills and the Fickens, and all the work that they did to help us understand the ecology of the species. And then those that followed in their footsteps, starting with a pretty large range-wide project back from 2008 to 2011, with the ultimate goal of developing a conservation plan. The conservation plan also had associated habitat BMP or habitat guidelines associated with them, and much of the research associated with the conservation plan also became publications in peer-reviewed journals. So a collective group of publications and such there that go out to a large group of dedicated scientists. So then we moved on to our next phase, right, of the recovery of the species. Until this time, we have done nothing. We've put a bunch of glossy pages together, and that's great. But we needed to convert a little bit of that older forest into a little bit of young forest. And we did that, and we think about doing this in two places in the eastern U.S. You need to think about the public land opportunities and private land opportunities. And we certainly started a lot of trial management and training the foresters and other land managers in the BMP criteria. We'd have workshops. We'd go to visit with them one-on-one, do some field tours. And eventually, these kinds of projects started to hit the landscape across our public lands. And golden-winged warblers were happy in some of those places. And we recognized that the trial management was something that we could move on to that next level of kind of more or less recovery management. But we also know that the East, if you're going to try to recover a species that uses forests, that you better include private landowners, whereby about 85% of our forest is privately owned. And they play a really huge role in the conservation of not just forest birds, not just the golden-winged warbler, but a lot of things. And one thing that we should compare and contrast is that Pennsylvania alone, that's 738,000 private landowners that we must deal with. Probably not quite the demographic that one needs to work with in the East with large landowners. We're working with primary, quite small landowners relative to working lands for wildlife projects out here. So that is a challenge in and of itself. So we certainly great work on public lands, a lot of progress being made, but we made great strides in 2012 when NRCS adopted the golden-winged warbler as one of working lands for wildlife as original species, the original 7. And it focuses on the Appalachian population. So we went to work. I went to work with a lot of the same structure that we've heard earlier in today and earlier in the week, with partner biologists and foresters working directly with NRCS field office staff, meeting with landowners, drafting plans, helping with the implementation process, doing all the things. It's just, listen, those are trees in the back, folks. Those are trees. It's no different than the cattle and the grass and all that stuff. It's just a different setting, right? But it's the same, right? We're all doing the same thing. We have foresters go out in the field and they identify threats and what might need to be done to make the forest better, and they help the landowners in the implementation process, meet with contractors, make sure that the projects are moving slowly from the start, and then we sit back and we get to watch habitat be created for the golden-winged warbler, and then hopefully the species will show up. So here are some results. It doesn't include the acres that we've added with the close of the fiscal year 2019, which was a great year for working lands for wildlife golden-wing. So 17,000 acres across those 6 Appalachian states, over 300 landowners enrolling in the program. And then we have to identify the fact that the model was working so well in the Appalachians that American Bird Conservancy and its partners in the Great Lakes drafted an RCPP that was successfully funded. And in that region, from 2015 to present, 8,050 acres enrolled in their RCPP, focusing on golden-wing and woodcock. So we have our private lands, our great public land partners, and a lot of habitat hitting the ground. So that's great, but in an era of where our accountability must move beyond acres and move into an era of does the species respond, the biological outcomes, we needed to ask some important questions. And this is where SEEP allowed us to formulate a plan of attack for a wide-scale monitoring program that would stretch across both the RCP in the Great Lakes and the Working Lands for Wildlife projects in the Appalachians. And for this today, we're going to focus on the forestry aspect of both the Great Lakes RCPP and the Working Lands for Wildlife. So keeping it where we were doing ultimately doing overstory removals, leaving a residual basal area ranging somewhere between 2 and 9 meters squared. So staying away from the farmland, more open land, shrubland management for this talk, but we do have data for those as well. So 667 unique sites, which equates to 667 unique landowners that need to be communicated annually 3 times in a given breeding season. There's just kind of a breakdown of our Appalachian points for both a public and private lands perspective, and then our Western Great Lakes sites and point count locations. So pretty straightforward methodologies. We did this through point counts. If you see an area that has been treated, we buffered it by 80-meter buffer to make sure that we are monitoring the interior portions and extending to the edge of our treated areas. They were not moving. At each point, we would visit each point twice in a given field season. It was a 13-minute point count that incorporated a passive period and a playback period of the species song. We then followed that by a great talk earlier on microhabitat. So we were also incorporating both microhabitat field surveys as well as remote sensing field surveys to kind of get an idea of both the landscape scale and microhabitat scale that might be influencing golden-winged warbler occupancy. So in the Appalachians, we use an occupancy analysis. That'll be the results that I'll be sharing with you today. And it's the pretty standard, straightforward occupancy analysis and the steps that are associated with that, right? So first modeling for detection, then we modeled the landscape features, followed by the microhabitat features, and then combinations of the best supporting models for both. Western Great Lakes, occupancy was so high that occupancy would be useless from telling us anything, right? So if 100% of everything is occupied, then what are you going to learn? So it wasn't 100%, but it was 90 about before the study was over. So this one was the same exact process, except, of course, hierarchical distance models were used as the method. So instead of ones and zeros, we actually used count data. Results. Appalachians, private lands occupancy over time from when we started to when we finished our initial rounds of monitoring in 2018. You can see that every year, golden-winged warbler occupancy increased. And on our public lands, we saw a similar pattern, but they were always starting, of course, a little bit higher, and we can talk about that in a bit. So here's a pattern of those occupied points of both public and private lands, and you can see that we had a patchiness associated with where these points were occupied, indicating that the species actually, kind of has this clump distribution, which is something we kind of knew, but we didn't think it was going to be quite this obvious. So a lot of vacant sites, so that's important to note. When we look at accounting for latitude, longitude, and elevation, the number of growing seasons was the most important microhabitat feature. Nothing else. Again, remember our talk this morning that talked about microhabitat for, I think it was sage grouse. Deciduous forest, the amount in the landscape is important. And then the amount of mixed forest in the landscape was negatively important. So we want lots of deciduous forests, not too much mixed forest, and we need to be patient with growing seasons. Interestingly, remember this pattern of proximity. DJ ran a Ripley's case statistic on this and found that indeed our golden-winged warbler occupied points were quite clumped. Clumped within about, most strongly clumped at 24 kilometers. Right there. If we move on to the Great Lakes, you can see that we had occupancy here. I'm just showing you. It just continued to rise, and it continues to rise as those habitats continue to succeed. Also, a bit heterogeneous in abundance. So the other side is abundance now, right? So the redder the higher, and orange the higher the abundance. If they're black, they were no abundance, and lighter colors not so high. So we kind of see a little bit of a heterogeneity there as far as abundance goes, with some areas that show a lot more or higher abundances at the points. Interestingly, if you look at the results, number of growing seasons, the microhabitat variable that was most influential on predicting occupancy, or abundance in this case, and mixed forest being negative. So pretty interesting that we had two different regions, two different forest types, aspen versus mostly mixed oak forest types, and the species responding, those factors being most influential, being the same. So if we build it, will they come? Remember the question. So it really depends. It depends on if you're in the Great Lakes. If you're in the Great Lakes, the answer is probably likely they will show up. You will have golden-winged warblers on your site. In the Appalachians, maybe. And we have to remember that the Appalachian population is really the reason why the species is being considered for listing. There's not a lot of golden-winged warblers out on that landscape to begin with, so expecting all of your sites to be occupied as high as you see them in the Great Lakes certainly would not be something you would expect, or you should expect. The analysis, it was pretty interesting that we identified features that we can actually help NRCS and partner or public lands biologists or foresters improve occupancy and abundance rates just by tweaking some of the ways that they identify or outreach to landowners or implement projects. And what was really interesting is those features were the same. Microhabitat feature being that year since harvest, and of course the mixed forest component being something that was negatively influencing it. So here's how the importance of all of this is transferring this knowledge to folks like NRCS field offices or our state partner biologists and foresters to be able to help them identify places on the landscape, to modify and to update some of the resources that are available to those practitioners. So we might consider the fact that, here's the original work from the plan, greater than 60%, preferably greater than 70% forest in the landscape, and 80% deciduous forest, no more than 20, right? Our research, I didn't share it, but ultimately the end results kind of point toward really you should probably maybe be thinking about, if you want to really influence occupancy, hint toward higher amounts of forest in the landscape. And of that forest in the landscape, greater than 90% should be of deciduous forest variety. Try not to work in areas where you have mixed forest occupying more than 10% of your forest cover. What's my time? Okay. So we use this for both outreach as well as thinking about incorporating into our future analyses. But I think this is the one that is most important from the standpoint of evaluating success of the program and where we are currently right now. And that is this microhabitat feature being the most important is time, number of growing seasons since management. Obviously, golden-winged warblers weren't flying over and saying, oh, that one looks like it's, that's 3 years post-management. It was identifying some kind of structural elements, and succession accounts for that, right? So you can imagine that we start with a forest and we leave some residual trees, and then we have to have succession do its thing over time, right? And the shrubs and the saplings come in. I know these sage grouse folks are like, shrubs, saplings, no. No, we want that. It's all right. And then eventually we get our golden-winged warblers to show up on site. So we need to be patient in the process of evaluating. We need to be strategic in when we may go back and visit someone's land to actually evaluate whether or not the golden-winged warbler has shown up. So that can influence our monitoring schedule moving forward as well. So the last thing I would say is that we need to have patience, and that history is in fact on our side. It's on our side when we come together as a collective. When we come together as a collective from both public and private landowners or land managers, and think about wetland restoration and the traction it took in the mid-'80s and where we are with waterfowl populations these days. Think about our good friend the Kirtland's warbler, right? We all know about some exciting news there. And then we can think about how long it took, right? It was slow going. It trudged for a while, but eventually we started to see change. And I think we're going to see that with the golden-winged warbler. It's going to be a conservation-dependent species unless we can change some markets, and there's certainly some good people working on that these days as well. But we don't know what that timeline is going to be. But I'm here to say that we should continue this process for this species on both public and private lands, because it's going to be successful, I feel. Oh, we all have a lot of people on our slides to give thanks to and credit to, and we're no different. It takes an army of technicians to survey the number of places that we survey, and a lot of partners to allow us to do the things that we're able to do. And with that, I'll take any questions that you might have. Thank you.
As the years after restoration, the occupancy goes up. Eventually, it's going to come back down as it matures. So you got to get out ahead of that and see where do I need to make another clearing to get that started again.
Yeah, that's correct.
Is that part of the guidelines, or how do you?
Well, we're certainly better able to do that on our public lands. We've identified big dynamic forest blocks that we're actually doing just that. But our foresters always continue to work with the private landowners to make those decisions that both are in line with golden-wing objectives and the landowner's objectives. The cool thing about golden-winged warblers that Cam's research focused on, but he won't be talking about today because he's talking about another component, was the post-fledging period. In the post-fledging period, golden-winged warblers actually go toward the slightly older forests. So the stem excluded saplings are all together now, not where golden wings are going to nest. So thinking about proximity of young forest and then coming back pretty soon as that's succeeding and going to be coming out of nesting habitat and creating more young habitat in proximity of that sapling stand now is probably really the best strategy you can have. Of course, we're limited in the east by the size of our landowners' properties, right? That's the biggest challenge is that, yeah, we might in a perfect world want to tell our landowner to do like 3 cuts over the next 20 years, but they may not actually have the land service. But we also have some great partners that are starting to couple multiple landowners together and thinking about how we can get them to all enroll in Working Lands for Wildlife collectively, and then we can manage their unit as a whole for such methods. Yeah.
One more question while I switch presentations, if anybody has one. It's like you're off the hook, Jeff.